Disney has been on a representation tear in the last several years, but it's been a false representation. Like, we're done with this main character now. Here you go, black folks. Enjoy Steve Rogers' sloppy seconds. Blacked in America is all yours. We needed publicity for these live-action remakes that aren't doing very well. Now, here you go, black folks. Guess you can have this old mermaid character. Thanks for the free marketing. You know, it seems like we don't have a lot of women in our comic franchise. Here you go, ladies. Here are very masculine characters, but we cast women instead.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
It's all so phony. And while it's fun to laugh at their disingenuous attempts to pander to various groups, today I'm excited for a change of pace. I get to praise Disney for something, sort of.
A surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one.
An attempt has been made, and I'm going to try the positive reinforcement route here and give Disney some treats to train this behavior. In the last year, they have, albeit quietly, started telling actual African stories instead of pallet swapping worn out characters and then dislocating their shoulder while patting themselves on the back about it.
Oh, everybody look at me. I'm the greatest, it's plain to see.
Last June, they partnered with African-based company Triggerfish and released Kiza's Moto Generation Fire, a group of short stories made by different African writers and directors. Then, in March of this year, they released Iwaju, a mini-series made by Kugali Media. While I wasn't in love with one of these, I still want to applaud the effort in the hopes that we get more stories from the continent, because there's so much variety and style in Africa, and it's really weird that few companies are going there for inspiration from the myths and folk tales and general history. But I want more. So let's talk about these shows and if you should watch them. Then I've got some other ideas for African stories they can tell. Oh, and another idea I had: you should hit that like button to help this video. Mafanikyo! And I'm back. Google told me that that word meant success in Swahili, and I sure hope I wasn't lied to. Now, I wanted to theme this one a little bit, so I purchased a coffee sampler from Cooper's Coffee, got the Kenya blend here today to celebrate, but to keep myself grounded so you don't think I know more than I do, I'm gonna drink it from this cup that I got from the most American gas station imaginable. Mel from the channel The Mel Man graciously reached out to offer some perspective about these two shows and the general direction of African entertainment, both locally and in exports to the West. I'm very grateful for his perspective, and I'll pepper in some of the conversation that we had. I'll also link the whole thing in the description. It was a great conversation, and I highly recommend you watch it.
Son, you should know that my recommendation is essentially a guarantee.
There's something else that I endorse. If today is your first day on YouTube, well, I'm just glad you're watching me. But if it's not your first time, you've probably heard of Ridge wallets. And if you're like me, you've wondered, it's a wallet. How do you improve on a wallet? And that's exactly what I asked them when they reached out to me. And they said, well, why don't you try it? So for the last 2 months, I have been using this thing exclusively. And I gotta say, I'm kind of surprised. I am a believer. And I think your dad will be too. Right away, this wallet forced me to get rid of the unnecessary crap that I've been carrying around just because. I don't need to carry these memberships on my person, which is the beauty of the minimalism that Ridge represents. And look at the difference in size right here. It's slimmer, shorter, and shallower than my old bifold, which I used to think was pretty small compared to a trifold. It's so small and light, I have actually forgotten that it's in my pocket. Now, I went with the brushed titanium with the cash strap because I'm boring and gray is my favorite color, but they have all sorts of styles, colors, and NFL logos to suit your style. I stress tested this at the beach, and it doesn't have any moving parts to get sand in, plus it's waterproof. Toss this thing around. You cannot hurt it, and it's got a lifetime warranty if you somehow manage to. Hey, Father's Day is coming up soon, so use the links below, get up to 40% off Ridge products. And thanks to Ridge for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to it. First up, my favorite of these two shows, Kiza's Moto. This isn't a show in the traditional sense, it's a collection of short stories. Each one is made by a different director and art team, which is cool because each one is unique in story and art style. As such, this is going to be hit or miss for everyone, but I found more hits than misses. I wasn't crazy about this surfing one or this one, Maremi, with this creepy small gray boy, but I enjoyed the rest. The reason I like short stories like this is that it makes the creator use every second to their advantage. If you only have 15 minutes to set up, tell, and resolve a whole story, you better be good. And for most of these, I think they nailed it. My personal favorites were Makuzi the Spirit Racer, First Totem Problems, and Stardust. Makuzi has a somewhat anime style with a choppy frame rate to add interest. With these short stories, you just have to get right to the point. This legendary racer guy wants a rematch with the elusive Makuzi, which I thought was this boy, but it's really his mom. Their racing power is part technology and part spirit power from their Zulu ancestors. Racer guy says he's gonna buy this poor part of town unless he gets his race. Kid steals his mom's stuff, and the race is on.
And here comes pride in the backstretch.
No, not you, Sawyer! Catchy tune, though. Be honest, did you think that I was gonna throw it to Toto at some point here? No, but I was tempted. Like I said, it's the visual interest that grabbed me on this one. It starts out in a futuristic village, we've got cool looking clothes and this shrine and this little robot spirit guy, then the race starts and things go speed racer mode. Sometimes the frame rate is so low I'm not sure it qualifies as an animation, but it's fast, it's bright, it's flashy. I loved it. First Totem Problems was a simpler looking animation with a more comedic approach. This girl is on the way to her adult ceremony to get her totem, which will result in adult privileges, a cool tattoo, and maybe some powers? Trouble is, her family seems to be a little split, and each side thinks that their totem is more important. She accidentally gets sucked into the spirit realm where she meets an ancestor from both sides, and they are bickering harder than her actual family. The living are not supposed to be here, so hijinks ensue. The ending is probably what you're thinking and what you want. This one was cute and funny. Lastly, Stardust was a bit more serious in both tone and visual style. This girl is living in the sewers and doesn't seem to be a full citizen of this place. This prophet fellow is handing out prophecies and she wants one. So she sneaks up to the stage and he seems inspired by her boldness, so he gives her a scroll. Back in her hovel, she gets it open, but it seems to be a trick. It's empty! So she tracks him as he heads out of town to this observatory to get some answers, and they get attacked along the way. If you had to read The Giver in school, that's where this is going. Again, we get a well-done setup, problem, action, and resolution, all in under 15 minutes. And that takes work. Quick sidebar, if you did have to read The Giver, that probably means that you also had to read Where the Red Fern Grows. And can I just say, what the hell? Whose idea was that? What joker at the school board book recommendation panel was like, you know, it'd be a really good idea if we made a bunch of 6th graders cry. Just really tore their little hearts out. Welcome to life and its disappointments, kids. Everything you love eventually dies. Go enjoy recess.
Well, that got dark.
Kiza was made by Triggerfish, which is a big studio, and they've worked with Disney before. Their website says Disney Plus should have a show called Kaya and the Kimoji Heroes, though I don't think we've ever run across that one. They've also worked with Netflix, and my kids have watched and enjoyed SEAL Team and Super Team 4. Moto leads us to the subject of Afrofuturism, because you may have noticed that all the clips I showed had a futuristic look. I find this really compelling. Futurism is a big sector in African entertainment, and it's fascinating because it's so different from Western sci-fi. Both of the Black Panther movies are prime examples of it. Futurism blends traditional visuals with advanced technology. Some of it has a distinctly anti-colonial theme, like in this episode of Moto about a boy tagging some ruins. He gets teleported to an alternate timeline where the area was not colonized, and it's a bustling utopia.
This is Mucharenga, a future parallel universe where Great Zimbabwe was never colonized.
As I talked with Mel, it became clear that futurism is not a clear concept, nor is it universally favored. He kept calling our topics layered, and the longer we talked, the more I realized the extent to which I underestimated the complexity of those layers. Something that he mentioned was that Western producers coming to the continent seek out artists doing futurism. I was very surprised by that, because it seems to me that most Western audiences love romanticizing old cultures. Recently, Shogun has been popular. It's very good. We tend to enjoy centuries-old Asian culture. Most fantasy is in a medieval European setting, and stories of kings and queens and chivalrous knights are always popular. We like to portray the noble savage imagery of Native Americans, one with nature, or the Aztecs and Mayans. You know what's awesome? Freaking Vikings! Can't get enough ancient Greece and Rome. Apparently, some guys think about it every day, according to the internet. As for Africa, we tend to gravitate to ancient Egypt, sometimes the exoticism of Morocco or Algeria, but typically northern Africa that connects to Europe. In most geographies, we want the old stories. We want to study the old cultures, but futurism is about transforming those old cultures, not erasing them, but honoring their spirit while imagining a bright African future.
We're working for a better tomorrow, today.
This, again, is very different from Western sci-fi. So I guess in this light, it does make sense that producers are looking to import this from the continent. With few exceptions like Star Trek, our sci-fi tends to be more bleak. Often you see futuristic stories dealing with the dangers of advanced technology or government or the general trajectory of human behavior. In contrast, Afrofuturism is optimistic and excited about the future, though it does sometimes contain that undercurrent of disdain for colonization. All in all, these stories like the Black Panther movies, can be very exciting. But I am on the traditional side of things. Personally, I want the tribal African stories. I want the myths and the folklore. I want the stories of Saharan nomads. I'm not a huge sci-fi person, so that probably plays into it. I am more of a fantasy person, so any fiction involving spirits or spirit magic or juju is going to appeal to me. There's a big mythological character that I'll be discussing later, but as I said, feelings differ on which stories should be popular and what should be presented to the world.
Because there's also the stigma that people have that, traditional African settlements and stuff were primitive and, it's not something that is looked at in the same way that samurais are looked at and medieval knights and even Vikings, like it's kind of all the same kind of time period where, things were horrible. There was a lot of war. There was a lot of chaos. But when it's told in the context of Africa, it's kind of, in general, a lot of people, even Africans, kind of feel like there's a negative connotation to it, and they feel like depicting that side of Africa is like saying this is what Africa is now.
And they don't want to keep putting that image out, and with good reason. There's a growing tech scene in many parts of Africa, like here in Nairobi. Here are some pictures of Nairobi. I don't know about you guys, but if someone showed me this city and asked me what it was, my first at least 10 guesses would have been wrong.
I'm not a smart man.
Afrofuturism was born out of the desire to fight those stereotypes, which I fully understand. It's just that when it comes to fiction, I want the old stuff. The complexity of African stories isn't limited to subject matter. It's also about style and writing, as we'll see in the other show that Disney sponsored, Iwaju. Now, this show got its start in a pretty cool way. Kugali Media is a small group in Africa, and during an interview a couple of years ago, when asked about their future plans, Hamid Ibrahim stated that their eventual plan was to, quote, kick Disney's ass in Africa. That's a pretty lofty goal, and when Jennifer Lee from Disney happened to read that interview, she was so impressed by that ambition that she decided to give them a hand in kicking her ass. The two companies partnered on this project, and now you can watch it on Disney+.
One could say that, but should one?
The issue is that I don't recommend that you do watch it. I wasn't feeling this one, and it pains me to say that because I want very badly for the African market to succeed, because storytelling is getting a bit stale in the West. Sadly, wanting it to be good does not make it so. The basic idea of this show is that Tola here is a girl living in a futuristic Lagos, Nigeria. Her father is a respected inventor and very wealthy. She's friendly with the gardening boy who lives on the mainland and is quite poor, and her father doesn't really want her associating with the help. We'll discover later that Dad used to be poor himself, but moving up in the world caused him to forget where he came from. He's working on a robot gecko that will act as a bodyguard of sorts, and it makes a dramatic appearance in the first minutes of the show, then not again until the end. This story honestly could have been told without that thing entirely. It seems like a merchandising opportunity more than anything.
Hello, I like money.
Unfortunately, Lagos is not a perfect utopia, and there is a criminal element kidnapping rich kids for ransom, and Tola gets kidnapped. Now, one positive thing that I'll say for this show is the interesting flow of dialogue on the mainland. A lot of the characters speak Nigerian Pidgin, and I'd recommend you turn on the captions if you don't already use them 100% of the time, like I do. What's with that, by the way? Why can't some of us hear anything without captions anymore? The blend of regular English, Nigerian Pidgin, and Yoruba makes for an interesting sound experience, and the flow of Pidgin especially has its own rhythm that I found myself really enjoying.
Tola, this your leg is strong. Oh. My madam don't turn 10. How I go forget? Make you go inside. I'm sure God's planned well for you. My madam, they stubborn like you, papa.
But the show starts off painfully slow. Like, put this on while you're doing chores, you won't miss much type slow. For the first 4 out of the total 6 episodes, I was bored to tears. And so were my kids. They dipped after 1 episode. The final 2 episodes do bring it together and they do get exciting, but in my opinion, that's still a poorly told story. And I do not recommend shows where you have to slog through multiple episodes to get to the good stuff. Your mileage may vary, but I wouldn't have finished it if I wasn't going to be talking about it here. Of course, Mel and I talked about it, and he said that's a very common theme with stories aimed at rural Africa. They like a slow build where nothing is implied and everything is shown. Everything is shown.
There's a visual language that people get used to when you watch American media, like you'll have a movie, people are in a house and they say, let's go rob the bank, and they'll stand up, and the next scene they're in a car, and the next scene they're at the bank. But what you'll find in a lot of Nollywood films is they'll say, let's go rob a bank. They'll stand up, they'll walk to the door, they'll open the door, they'll close the door, they'll enter a car, they'll drive, someone will open, they'll show you everything.
Yeah.
They'll show you the whole thing, and it's and if you're not used to watching stuff like that, it can be extremely... I usually cannot get through an entire Nollywood film.
So another issue with bringing African stories is that they have to be adapted to what a Western audience wants, and we typically don't like intros this slow. But this brings up a problem that you might be noticing. How much can we change the style and the substance of African stories to fit Western taste before they are no longer African? Beyond that, there remains the question of which stories to bring. My fellow Americans, if you had to name some ancestral tribes from Africa, how many could you come up with? You got Zulu, you got Maasai, Hutu, maybe you had a couple more. Maybe the Xhosa? No, that can't be right. According to my Google machine, there are over 3,000 tribes in Africa, each with history and stories all their own. A popular phrase in Africa when talking about Western views of them is, Africa is not a country, which is easy to forget, especially if you're American. America is enormous, like Africa, mind-bogglingly huge, and it's broken into 50 states, but it's still one country. Sometimes I forget that Africa is not that way. Their borders are real, and the cultural separation is real. And where do you go to get the stories? We didn't get a chance to talk about this, but Mel emailed me after and said the tribes and country lines now interfere. They're all over the place. Many of the country's borders were drawn arbitrarily by colonial powers without regard to tribal land, which is just par for the freaking course. Look up the formation of Pakistan. You can search for the partition of India. Good times. So in his country of Kenya, Mel said there are 42 tribes, all vying for power in every election. It's like a royal rumble every few years. Then there are those who have decided to move away from tribal identity. He told me neighboring Tanzania, having a socialist president, moved away from tribal identity to a single Tanzanian identity. And in his opinion, it has been very effective and unifying for the country. Wait a minute, unifying? No, I'm not going to put that in there. I'm going to put something positive for socialism. No, hang on. Greg, editing Greg. Hey, cut that last part out. Capitalism, baby. It's like a royal rumble every few years. And he also said it's difficult to tell tribal stories in other countries, like neighboring Tanzania for unspecified reasons. But I think Disney has shown they have the logistical capabilities to tackle this problem. And since they seem to be developing an interest there, the logical question is, when do we get the first African Disney princess? Well, turns out they were working on one a few years back. A project called Sade existed, and I can't find any news about it after 2022, which makes me think that it's either in development hell or it's been quietly disposed of. Details on the project were always sparse, but it looks like Sade was going to be the first African princess. I asked Mel for his idea for a pitch to Disney for a princess movie using a historical figure or just purely fictional, a girl overcoming the odds, because it's not the continent of Africant.
These are funny jokes.
One challenge he mentioned is that many of the prominent women in African history are tied to colonialism, which can bog down the story and irritate certain potential European viewing markets, and may not be something even Africans want to hear about.
So there's stories that are, pre-colonial stories, and then there's colonial stories, and then there's post-colonial stories, and all of them somehow fit into history because, like when I did the political history we learned in school was about, the leaders who took to government after colonialism. But there's a whole thing that happened before, and there's another one that's tied in with, Europeans coming to Africa. And that's something a lot of people in general tend to want to get away from. It's not something I hear people talking about from my parents' generation, from all the traveling I've done in Africa. That's not, something people really want to get into.
He mentioned an Ashanti figure that I assume might be Ya Asantewaa. No way I got that right. A queen who rebelled against British colonists when they demanded a sacred artifact, a golden stool. Another famous figure I found was a Hausa queen, Amina of Zazzau. The issue with her is that for a Disney story, she's a bit too in control. Most of her reign was spent in conquest to expand Zazzau territory. There are many strong historical women in African history to base a great story on. The issue with a Disney princess is that she is typically not strong. She generally finds herself in an impossible situation, but through her smarts and creativity and cooperation with others, she thinks her way to success. The Girl with Two Skins is a famous tale that might serve for an adaptation like this. Mel noted these same issues and suggested a more traditional folktale about a girl who saves her family from a giant. He said giants and ogres are featured often in these stories. In his version, the giant eats the girl's family and then falls asleep. She cuts them out of its stomach and replaces them with a large warm stone so the giant feels full. I looked for the story and I found a similar version where she tricks the giant with talk of a magical stone that will keep it warm and full forever, but it's just a super hot rock that she heated up, which burns the giant's mouth and causes it to vomit up the family. Naturally, Disney would have some work to do because most folktales around the world are like,
she saw something new and died.
So the Mouse House would need to do what it does best and soften the edges to make a happy family story. It's possible that they could blend the two ideas, perhaps a story of a giant with a Cockney or Portuguese accent that comes to conquer and steal a golden artifact and eats people who defy it. The daughter of the king devises a plan to stop it, probably with the help of a cute young zebra or something, Disney princess style. I'm not sure if the current talent at Disney could allude to colonialism without smacking the audience in the face with it though, so probably best to just stick with a fully fictional tale. Lastly, here's an idea that I tucked into a video last year and still holds value, I think. An easy way to do African stories in the West would be to use a character that many people have already heard of before, even just in passing, and that is Anansi. What makes Anansi such a great character for Disney animation is that he is sometimes known as the keeper of stories. He can be a narrator for multiple stories, or he can be the main character. He's flexible, figuratively and literally. He's a man-spider. One particular story would, I think, fit Disney's current agenda while also expanding their scope, and that is the story of how Anansi became the keeper of stories. He won them in a bet with the Sky King. Now, the story goes that the Sky King owned all the stories and Anansi wanted them. Some stories say it was selfish, some say it was to share them with humanity like Prometheus. The Sky King sets him to catch 4 elusive creatures, which he does, and becomes the keeper of stories. This story is ripe for a Disney adaptation for so many reasons. 1, most African myths, like this, involve talking animals and people. It's a 90s Disney slam dunk. 2, there can be a clear moral lesson here. 3, we're doing authentic representation, which Disney claims is important to them right now. And finally, in this story, Anansi's wife is the planner for how he captures each of the animals, so we have the gender equality that they value. In some stories, Anansi throws his mother-in-law in the deal with the Sky King, so we'd probably leave that out of this version. Naturally, we'd need to Disneyfy this story. We can't have our hero selling animals into slavery in Africa. So we could have him collude with them. The Sky King would be our villain here, hoarding the stories from humanity and generally being a selfish monarch. Throughout the movie, he would disguise himself and come down to try to thwart Anansi when it became clear that he might actually succeed. When Anansi delivers the animals, we get an Ocean's 11 style recap where we learn he actually had deals with each of them, their cages are not really locked, and a coup occurs, deposing the Sky King and freeing his court. Anansi could also start as a selfish character, wanting those stories for his own fame, but gradually learning to become selfless and freeing the stories for all of humanity. It's so classic Disney, it almost writes itself. Obviously, I'm open to working with Mr. Iger on this one, but I'd prefer a call from John Lasseter or someone at DreamWorks.
I want you to call me.
Do you like the idea of African stories? Are you excited at the prospect of Disney telling more of them? What do you think an African Disney princess would look like? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to check out Mel's channel and our conversation. I'm going to link both below. He's got really great videos and some cool personal projects in the works. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you next time.